Hi, thanks very much for the opportunity to tell my story. A little bit more of a little bit of my history was my parents and my grandparents were actually pioneers to Zimbabwe. So I'm I guess about a fifth generation African, and my grandfather actually was part of. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Cecil John Rhodes. You may have heard of the Rhodes Scholarship.
Oh yeah.
Well, he made a lot of money from the diamonds and the gold fields in South Africa during the 1800s. Wow. And then he went north into the interior of Africa in the 1890s. It was all for Queen and country, for Queen Victoria, of course. And they named the country after him. It was Rhodesia was named after him, which is the country that I was brought up in. And I was born in the late 50s, grew up in the 1960s, and really it was very much like, I would argue it's very much like a Midwest American city. It was just an idyllic childhood and just wonderful people. And then it all changed in 1980 when Robert Mugabe came into power. He was financed by the communist Chinese and the North Koreans. And the first thing that he did when he came into power was he had this brigade of North Koreans and then his own military. And they went around, actually what was interesting was that the world was going to say there would be a white bloodbath because of the colonists in Rhodesia had suppressed the African people. But the reality was that Robert Mugabe went and persecuted his political opposition. And at that time, he really left the white folks pretty much alone. But there was a lot of tribalism. He was a Mashona, which was the major tribe in Zimbabwe. And he went after the Marabides because they really were his political opposition. And in those early years, in the 1980s, they had one of the estimates was as high as 32,000 people were murdered by his goons. There's various numbers. The International Association of Genocide Scholars claimed it was more than 20,000. So anyway, it was a very large number of people who were murdered. The next thing that happened was that some years later he started with land reform. And this is where he had promised all the freedom fighters that they could have land, and when they started saying to him, hey, where's our land? He said, well, go take it from the farmers. So they threw out a lot of farmers. Prior to that, Zimbabwe was really known as the breadbasket of Africa. They were exporting enormous amounts of food all over the place. And within a few years, it was importing food. So and then soon after that, basically the economy was collapsing, so they just started printing money. Jody, do you want to put that? Is it not there yet? So they started printing money, and we had hyperinflation. So when I was growing up as a child, the Zimbabwe dollar was on par with the American dollar. In 1996, so that was 1980. In 1996, when my family and I immigrated to America, Zimbabwe dollar was worth 10 American cents. So it was a 1-to-10 ratio. But soon after that, they just started printing money like crazy. This was the largest denomination. And by the way, along the way, they had actually kept on knocking zeros off. Every now and again, they do a reset to the currency because there were too many zeros. So if they kept all the zeros, there would actually be 27 zeros on the end of that one. And this, by the way, is worth more now than it was when it was printed. When it was printed, it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. And I just saw today that if you go onto Amazon or one of these websites, I believe you can buy it for a few $100s. So it's quite a lot now. But if anyone's worried about the US debt, we can fix it very, very easily, 3 times over. But then just a few other things that Mugabe did. At one time, and again, I'm not sure what triggered it, but they had all these forced evictions which affected over 1 million people. There were just many, many things that he did during his reign. I'm going to throw out a few words here which I'm not sure if you will recognize. So, for example, he did a lot of rigging. And if I say the word ballot box stuffing, intimidation tactics, media manipulation, postal ballot abuse, these are all tricks. I mean, the Democrats learned from Mugabe. And then they spoke about, they talk about the corruption within the Zimbabwean government. They talk about misuse of state funds. Does that ring a bell? Cronyism. Election fraud, we've covered that. They actually have a large number of diamonds. In fact, it was one of the, I don't know if it was the largest source of blood diamonds, but there's an enormous quantity of diamonds they discovered after Mugabe came into power. And these are all sent to China because they're considered blood diamonds by the West. They talk here about land seizures for personal gain. In fact, my brother is a farmer. He still farms on his homestead farm in Zimbabwe. But he did, at certain time, there were opportunities to buy land, and so he did have about 20,000 acres of land, which was, he had a lot of cattle and that sort of thing. That land was all seized. He was not compensated. And today, if you fly over that land, you just see that it's just not doing anything. And then, there were other things that they talk about with Mugabe: suppression of dissent. Maybe these words will ring a bell: arbitrary arrests, torture, intimidation, media censorship. Now, I have to say that he did a much better job than some of our political opponents, because when I say better, far worse job. There was an awful lot of torture, intimidation, and murders, of course, in Zimbabwe. Media censorship, election violence, and crackdown on protests. So that's just a small flavor of Mugabe's leadership. He was actually ousted, it was in the last 5 or 10 years, but the new leader is not that much better. So, in closing, I think that the talk really was about escape from communism. I don't really know if many of these thugs or dictators are communists. I think they're just evil opportunists. They don't really have a philosophy in life. It's more a case of just finding and just taking an opportunity and using that to gain power and influence. And I really, when I look at the Democrats, the leadership I'm talking about, I think they're not that much different. So anyway, thank you for listening to my story.